Have you ever had a moment where you have felt completely overwhelmed? What was the reason for that moment? Was it starting a new job or moving to a new city? Was it a complicated relationship or a struggle with mental health that made you feel that way? Perhaps it was simply looking on social media and being reminded of everything that you weren't doing. Or perhaps it was being made to feel different by people who didn't even know you. In all of those moments, it's very easy for us to feel overwhelmed. And I suppose what I'd like to talk to you today about is what happens when you bring kindness into those moments. See, I believe kindness can make a difference, and kindness can change the world. I was talking to someone the other day about kindness. It was actually at the time this photo was taken. And she was telling me that people seemed a lot more closed off these days. And that the more closed off you are, the more deeply uncomfortable you are with being kind. And that really stuck with me because I thought, is being kind really that confronting? And I suppose for someone who hasn't given or received much kindness in their life, it can be. And so I asked my friend, what is the kindest thing that someone has done for you? And this is the story she told me. One morning, Jazz was feeling especially down. And she decided that the best thing to do would be to take herself out of the house and go and have breakfast at a cafe. So she went to a cafe and had breakfast, and as she was getting up to leave, an old man walked up to her and asked her, "Are you all right?" And in that moment, Jazz thought she must have been looking especially miserable for a stranger to come up to her and ask her that question. And she said to him, "I think I'm doing okay." And he told her not to worry and went on his way. Later that day, she was down at the shops and she saw the same old man. And she ran up to him and said, "Thank you. I don't know how you knew, but I really needed to hear that from someone." I suppose for Jazz, the essence of that moment was about being seen in a moment of vulnerability. And if I had to reflect on this, I would say, imagine being overwhelmed and having a stranger reach out to you with kindness. It's a pretty powerful thing. And that's really the kind of stories that I started to discover through my project, the Embassy of Kindness. And at the essence of that story is talking to people about their experience of kindness. If I had to think of one of the kindest things that has happened to me, I think of my friend Amal. 2 years ago, I was in a job which was beginning to get overwhelming. The pressure and anxiety was getting the better of me. And as many people do in those situations, they start to withdraw and close off. And if you wanted to describe it in a way of kindness, you would say, it was at a time when I was being less kind to myself. And as a result of that, I became so isolated that I decided I needed to leave my job. And I was thinking what I would do next. And it was really through my friendship with Amal that we came up with the idea of going out into the world and finding kindness. Because I was at a time where I needed more kindness, and in many ways so was she. And so what we did was, we decided, as photographers, we needed a new lens to capture the kindness in the world. Now, what kind of lens would you take? For us, we came up with 5 questions that would get us to the heart of kindness, whether we were talking to strangers or friends. And those 5 questions were, what does kindness mean to you? Who is the kindest person you know? What is the kindest thing that someone has done for you? If you had to be kinder to yourself, what would you do differently? And finally, do you believe that kindness can change the world? And so we took this project out into the streets of Melbourne at the time and started to listen to people's stories and capture their portraits. And we then shared this on Instagram on the Embassy of Kindness. One of the first conversations we had was with Brad. We met Brad in the iconic street art precinct of Hosier Lane in Melbourne. Brad was a young Indigenous Australian, and he was working behind the counter of a place called Good To Go Coffee. And Good To Go Coffee was a great social enterprise that helped young people like Brad overcome barriers to employment. And it also had a pay-it-forward system with coffee, where you could buy coffees for those in need. And when we spoke to Brad, what we learned was that he really enjoyed being kind to people and giving coffees to people in need. And what was really special about Brad's story was Brad himself had been homeless for 2 to 3 years. And so this was his way to give back to the community. Now, we would never have understood or known Brad's story if we hadn't had those conversations and asked those questions. And I guess what I'm telling you today is that those questions really help us learn something special and important about a person that we wouldn't otherwise consider, which is how they relate to kindness. In every journey, there is a defining moment, and for us it was Alan. We met Alan in Fed Square. He was sitting by himself, and he was kind enough to talk to us. And he told us that he had been in the military for 30 years, and he went on to tell us of a story when he was in Vietnam as a soldier. He was a young soldier with his platoon, and they were walking through a village. And they came upon a young woman holding a small bundle, a young woman who was very distressed. And whilst they couldn't understand what she was saying, they realised that she wanted food and water for her and her child, who was the little bundle. They found some food and water, and they went to her. They gave the food and water to her, and they realised at that point her child was dead. And what it was clear was she was in such a state of distress that she hadn't reconciled with that fact. They managed to calm her down and somehow convinced her that they would take care of her baby. And then she went on her way, and they never saw her again. After that moment, they left the village, walked to the top of a hill, wrapped the baby in a t-shirt, said a prayer, and buried it. And for Alan, that was one of the most kindest things he has ever experienced in his life. Now, I don't know how long Alan had been carrying that story for, but I'm very grateful that we had actually stopped to have that conversation with him. And I asked Alan, why did you choose to tell us that story? And he said, well, I saw you both walking across the road and you look like kind people. And I guess the thing there is we really need to think about how we talk to people and the kind of questions we ask, because the stories they have to share are stories that are really worth hearing. The last story I would like to tell you is about a student we met on the streets of Melbourne called Sheha. She had come from Saudi Arabia and she had been in Australia for 3 months. What Sheha liked to do most of all is come into the city and talk to people so she could practice her English. The only problem was everyone was too busy, lost in their technology and staring at their mobile phones. So she never really got a chance to talk to many people. And so she would wait for them to look up and maybe smile, and that would be her opening to reach out to somebody and ask them for help or strike up a conversation. Now, when we had our conversation with her, we learnt that every day she used to write a one-line poem before she went out into the world. And the one-line poem she wrote on that day when we met her was, "What umbrella shall I take to shield me from the rains of life?" And for us, that was quite special because it made us think that kindness is that umbrella that we take to shield us from the rains of life. There are many stories of kindness out there in the world. I have had probably over 100 conversations, and each of those stories have shown how kindness can lift a person from a very difficult place. And I suppose if I had to leave something with you, it would be that this idea of an embassy isn't about a place with physical walls. It is about a space that we create between two people talking about the idea of kindness. My question to you is, how much kindness do you have in your life, and how much more kindness do you want? If I could leave you with anything, it would be the 5 questions that I spoke to you earlier on, and invite you to ask those questions of yourself and of the people around you. What does kindness mean to you? Who is the kindest person you know? What is the kindest thing someone has done for you? If you had to be kinder to yourself, what would you do differently? And finally, do you believe kindness can change the world? And that's really the essence of this project. It isn't simply a photo project on Instagram. It's a way of life. And what it reminds us is that we aren't just humankind, we are kind humans. Welcome to the Embassy of Kindness.